There is a night in the life of Jacob that most people remember wrong, and they remember it wrong in a very specific way. They remember that Jacob wrestled God. All night, in the dark, by a river, a man and the Almighty locked together in the dust until dawn. And the detail everyone keeps, the detail that makes the story so strange it stays lodged in the memory, is that Jacob won, that somehow a human being grabbed hold of God and would not let go and held on and outlasted him and walked away the victor. The man beat God. That is the version we carry, and on the surface, the text seems to say exactly that. It says, the two of them wrestled until daybreak. And then it says something almost impossible to believe, that the other one saw he did not prevail against Jacob, did not prevail against Jacob, as though God tried to win and could not, as though the deceiver from Canaan was simply stronger or more stubborn than the God who made the stars. But, read one more sentence, 1. Because the very next line quietly detonates the whole comfortable picture. It says that when the man saw he could not overpower Jacob, he reached out and touched the socket of Jacob's hip. And with that one touch, Jacob's hip came out of joint. A single touch. Not a blow, not a throw, not a submission hold. A touch in passing, almost gentle, and the strongest bone joint in the human body simply gave way. And the moment you feel the weight of that touch, the entire story turns inside out. Because a being who can undo a man's hip with a fingertip was never losing that wrestling match. He was holding back the whole night, which means the real question is not how Jacob beat God. Jacob did not beat God. The real question is why God, who could have ended it in a heartbeat, chose to spend an entire night letting a desperate man hold on to him. And then, at the end, let that man walk away with a limp, a blessing, and a brand new name. Let's go down to the river. To understand the fight, you have to understand the man and the night he was having. Jacob is going home. He has been away for 20 years, working for his uncle Laban, and now he is bringing his whole household back to Canaan. And there is one person waiting for him there, Esau, the brother he cheated. 20 years earlier, Jacob had stolen Esau's blessing by deceiving their blind father, and Esau had promised to kill him for it. And Jacob had run. Now he is coming back, and word reaches him that Esau is riding out to meet him with 400 men. 400? That is not a welcome party, that is an army. And Jacob, in the 25th verse of Genesis 32, does the thing he has always done. He schemes. He splits his camp in two so that if one is attacked, the other can escape. He sends wave after wave of gifts ahead to soften his brother. He arranges, he calculates, he manages the situation the way he has managed every situation his whole life. And then, when all the arranging is done, the text says he sent everyone across the river, his wives, his children, everything he owned, and Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day, alone. That word matters. For the first time in the story, Jacob has run out of things to arrange. Everyone is across the water. The gifts are sent. The plans are made. There is nothing left to scheme, no one left to send ahead, no angle left to work. He is by himself in the dark on the wrong side of a river, waiting for a brother who wants him dead. And it is precisely there, at the exact end of his own cleverness, that someone comes for him in the night. And the Hebrew does something at this moment so deliberate, it is almost a poem, and almost every English reader walks straight past it. 3 words collide in these verses, and they are built from nearly the same sounds. The man's name is Yaakov, Jacob. The river he is camped beside is the Jabbok, the Jabbok. And the verb the text uses for wrestled is Jabbok, Yaakov, Jabbok, Jabbok. Say them out loud and they blur into one another, the same handful of consonants tumbling over and over. because the writer wants you to feel that this fight is not random. The man, the place, and the struggle are woven from the same threads. Jacob has been wrestling his entire life, with Esau, with Laban, with everyone, and now, at the river whose very name echoes his own, the wrestling finally becomes literal. And that verb, Jabbok, is a rare one. It barely appears anywhere else in the Hebrew Bible. But it carries a buried image because it is closely tied to the word for dust. To wrestle in Hebrew is to get dusty, to grapple so hard, so low, so long that you kick up the dry ground and end up covered in it, two bodies rolling in the dirt. This is not a clean, distant, spiritual encounter. The word drags God down into the dust with a fugitive. That is the first shock of the scene before a single other detail. The God of Abraham is on the ground, in the dirt, grappling in the dark with a man who spent his whole life grabbing. Because grabbing is the whole story of this man, and it is written into his name. Jacob, Yaakov, comes from the Hebrew word akeb, which means heel. He was named it at birth because when his twin Esau came out first, Jacob came out second with his hand wrapped around Esau's heel, already grasping, already trying to pull the one ahead of him back, already reaching for a place that was not his. And the name became a verb. To Jacob, someone in Hebrew, is to grab them by the heel, to trip them, to supplant them, to take what is theirs by cunning. When Esau realizes his blessing has been stolen, he says it bitterly, "Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has grabbed my heel twice now." The name is a diagnosis. This is a man defined from the womb by grasping, by taking, by getting ahead through his hands and his wits and his willingness to deceive. And it worked. That is the uncomfortable part. Jacob's grasping worked. He got the birthright. He got the blessing. He got the wives, the flocks, the wealth. Every time he grabbed, he came away with something. His whole life is a record of a man winning by holding on and refusing to let go of whatever he had seized. And now, on the last night before he has to face the one person his grasping cannot fix, a brother he cannot deceive his way past, an army he cannot scheme his way around, God shows up in the dark and does the one thing that has never happened to Jacob before. God grabs him back, and here is where we have to be honest about what the text does and does not say, because the popular version adds numbers the Bible never gives. You will hear it said that they wrestled for 6 hours, or all through some precisely measured span. The text does not say that. What it says is simpler and somehow heavier. They wrestled until the breaking of the day, all night. However long the dark lasted, that is how long the struggle lasted. A whole night of grappling in the dust by the river, with no rest, no pause, no winner. And the strangeness only grows the longer you sit with it, because we have already seen how the fight ends. Yeah, one touch, and Jacob's hip is gone. So, the all-night length was never because God could not finish it. God could have finished it in the first minute. The length was the point. God chose to spend the entire night locked to this man, letting Jacob strain and struggle and pour out every last ounce of the strength he had always trusted until the sky began to gray and Jacob had nothing left. And still, God had not used his real power at all. It is as though the whole night was designed to bring Jacob to the end of Jacob, to let the grasper grasp until his arms gave out, to let the man who had won his entire life by his own strength discover, hour by hour in the dark, that there was someone his strength could not move, and to keep him there held until he understood it. And then comes daybreak, and the touch, and it is worth slowing all the way down on the word because it is the hinge of the entire passage. The Hebrew verb is naga, and naga is a light word. It means to touch, to reach out, and make contact, the same word you would use for brushing something with your fingertips. It is emphatically not the word for a strike, a blow, a wound inflicted by force. When the man wants to end the deadlock, he does not overpower Jacob. He does not slam him down. He touches him. He reaches out, almost casually, and lays a finger on the hollow of Jacob's hip, and the joint dislocates. And in that one gentle word, the text tells you everything you need to know about who is really in control all night. The being who supposedly could not prevail ends the match with the lightest possible gesture, a touch. And the strongest joint in Jacob's body surrenders instantly. This is the sentence that kills the Jacob beat God reading forever. You cannot dislocate a grown man's hip with a fingertip. No one can. Unless the entire night, the straining and the sweating and the deadlock was a kindness, a God deliberately matching himself to a man's level, wrestling at human strength on purpose, so that Jacob could have the fight he needed to have. And when it was time, one touch pulled the curtain back and showed Jacob the truth. He had never been wrestling an equal. He had been wrestling the Almighty, who had been gentle with him all night long. And now, watch what Jacob does, because this is the moment he stops being Jacob. His hip is dislocated. He cannot wrestle anymore. The leverage is gone. The strength is gone. He is a broken man who can barely stand. And the mysterious wrestler says, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." And Jacob, who has spent his entire life grabbing in order to take, grabs one last time. But this time, for something completely different. He says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." He is not fighting anymore. He is clinging. There is a world of difference between the two, and the whole story turns on it. All night, Jacob wrestled to win. Now, crippled and unable to win, he simply holds on and refuses to be let go. Not to defeat God, but to be blessed by him. The grasper has finally found the one thing worth grasping, and he has found it only after he was broken out of grasping at everything else. That is the paradox the whole scene has been building toward. Jacob does not prevail by overpowering God. He prevails by being overpowered, and then refusing to let go of the one who overpowered him. His strength failed, and in its place came something he had never had before: desperate, empty-handed dependence. For the first time in his life, Jacob is holding on to God not as a rival to be beaten, but as the only hope he has left. And that, not the wrestling, the clinging, is what heaven counts as winning. And so the wrestler asks him a question that God has, in a sense, been asking him his entire life. What is your name? It seems almost cruel. God knows his name. But Jacob has to say it out loud, in the dark, because his name is his confession. The last time someone asked Jacob to say who he was, he lied. He stood before his blind father and said, "I am Esau, your firstborn," and stole the blessing with a false name. Now, 20 years later, in the dust, broken, he is asked again, "Who are you?" And this time he tells the truth. Jacob, grasper, heel grabber, supplanter. He names himself honestly for the first time, and it is the most important word he has ever spoken, because you cannot be given a new name until you have owned your old one. And the moment he says it, it is taken from him. Your name will no longer be Jacob, the wrestler says, but Israel, Yisrael. And the name is built from two pieces. The Hebrew verb Sarah, which means to strive, to struggle, to contend, to persevere, and El, the word for God, Israel, one who strives with God. And the wrestler explains it. For you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed. The grasper is given a name that means struggler with God, not conqueror, not victor, not strong man, struggler. The new name does not erase the fight, it redeems it. It says, the striving that defined your whole broken life was not wasted. But from now on, it will be striving with God, clinging to God. And that kind of striving is the only kind that ever truly prevails. He walked into that night as Jacob, the man who grabbed. He walked out as Israel, the man who was held. Quick word before the last turn. If this kind of study, the sort that takes a story you thought you knew and turns it until the Hebrew shows through, is useful to you, subscribing genuinely helps more than you would guess. That is all. Back to the river. Now, honesty requires a pause here, because this passage guards a genuine mystery, and anyone who claims to have it fully solved is telling you more than the text does. Who exactly was the man? The text is strikingly careful. It never says God wrestled Jacob. It says a man wrestled with him-ish, an ordinary word for a man. And it stays coy the whole way through, calling him simply the man, never naming him. But then it does two things that pull hard in the other direction. First, it refuses to tell us the wrestler's name. When Jacob asks, the man deflects, why do you ask my name? The way divine figures elsewhere in Scripture withhold the name too holy to hand over. And second, and decisively, Jacob himself draws the conclusion. He names the place Peniel and tells us why. For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life was spared. Jacob, at least, was certain he had grappled with God and lived to describe it. And centuries later, the prophet Hosea, looking back on this night, says, Jacob struggled with the angel and prevailed, weeping and begging for favor, folding the wrestler and the divine together. So what do we do with the tension? A man who is somehow God. The most honest answer is that the passage is describing what theologians call a Theophany, an appearance of God in human form, God stepping down into a body, into the dust, to meet a man where he was. Many Christian readers go one step further and see here a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ, the same God who would one day take on flesh permanently, showing up early in the dark to grapple with a sinner. That step is an interpretation, and I will be honest that the text does not spell it out. It is a conclusion drawn from the whole shape of Scripture, not from this passage alone. But what is not in doubt, what the text states plainly through Jacob's own mouth, is that this was an encounter with God. God close enough to touch, close enough to hold, close enough to wound and to bless. The mystery of exactly how is left standing. The fact that it was God is not. And that name Jacob gives the place is its own quiet miracle. And it deserves a moment. Peniel, or Peniel, is two Hebrew words fused together. Panim, meaning face, and El, meaning God, the face of God. Jacob calls that patch of riverbank the face of God because he says, I have seen God face to face, and my life has been delivered. And you have to understand how astonishing that sentence is inside the Hebrew Bible, because everywhere else the assumption is the exact opposite. No one shall see my face and live, God tells Moses. To see the face of God was understood to be lethal. The unshielded holiness of God would consume any sinner who looked on it directly. And yet here is Jacob, a deceiver, a grasper, a man with every reason to be consumed, saying, I saw God's face, and I am still breathing. My life was spared. Why was he spared? Because God had come down to a level Jacob could survive. God did not appear in unveiled glory that would have incinerated him. God came as a man in the dark, in the dust, and let Jacob hold on to him and live. The face of God, which should have killed Jacob, instead blessed him, because God chose to meet him gently, at human scale, close enough to wrestle. And that is the whole gospel in a single Hebrew place, name, centuries before the gospel. The face of God, which no sinner can survive, comes down low enough to be survived. And Jacob walks away from Peniel changed in a way you can see, because the text will not let him leave unmarked. The sun rises on him, it says, as he passes Peniel, limping because of his hip. He is blessed. He is renamed. He has met God and lived, and he is limping. The wound does not get healed on the way out. Jacob carries it with him for the rest of his life. the permanent, physical, every single step reminder of the night God broke his strength. And that limp is not a tragedy tacked onto a happy ending. It is part of the blessing. Because Jacob's entire problem was his own strength, his ability to grab, to scheme, to win by his own power. The limp is God's mercy made visible, a body that can no longer rely on itself, a man who from now on will walk leaning, dependent, unable to sprint away and scheme like he used to. God did not just give Jacob a new name. He gave him a new walk. The grasper would spend the rest of his days physically unable to stand on his own strength, and that was the kindest thing that ever happened to him. The text even tells us Israel's descendants remembered it in their bodies, refusing ever after to eat the muscle of the hip socket, because that is where God touched their father. A whole nation carrying in its diet the memory of the night their ancestor was broken and renamed. The wound became a scar, and the scar became a story, and the story became the name of a people, Israel, the ones who limp, the ones who were touched by God and lived. So let this river come off the page, because you have been to it, or you will. Most of us are Jacob far longer than we would like to admit. We are graspers. We get through life by our own cleverness, our own arranging, our own strength. We scheme our way around the things we fear. We manage our relationships and our futures with both hands. And mostly, like Jacob, it works. We win. We get the thing, and because it works, we never stop to notice that we are holding on to everything except God, that our whole life is a clenched fist, grabbing at security, at control, at outcomes, at anything we can seize and keep. And God, in his mercy, will sometimes let a night come. A night at the end of our arranging, where everyone is across the river, and the thing we fear is riding toward us in the morning, and there is nothing left to scheme. A night where we are, at last, alone. And into that night, if you have ever been in it, comes a strange grace that does not feel like grace at all. It feels like a fight. It feels like God has turned against you, like you are wrestling something in the dark you cannot beat and cannot escape. But what is actually happening is the kindest thing God can do to a grasper. He is wrestling you to the end of your own strength. He is prying the clenched fist open, not to leave you empty, but because a hand that will not open can never be filled. And a hand that will not let go of everything else can never take hold of him. The wound he gives you in that night, the thing that breaks, the strength that fails, the limp you will carry after, is not him defeating you. It is him giving you a body that finally has to lean on him. And here is the mercy hidden in the whole story. The thing Jacob discovered in the dust and spent the rest of his limping life knowing. You do not prevail with God by being strong enough to win. You prevail by being weak enough to cling. The blessing does not go to the one who overpowers heaven. It goes to the one who, broken and unable to fight anymore, simply refuses to let go. Jacob got his new name only after he lost his old strength. He saw the face of God only after he ran out of everywhere else to run. And he walked into the morning limping, which is to say, he walked into the morning finally, permanently, leaning on God, which is the only way any of us was ever meant to walk. So the story we remember as the night a man beat God turns out to be the night God lovingly lost so that a grasper could finally win, by being broken open, renamed, and taught, at last, to hold on to the only one worth holding. You are never going to out-wrestle God, but if you will stop trying to beat him and start refusing to let him go, you will find, like Jacob, that the God who could end you with a touch came all the way down into the dust to be held by you, and to bless you as the sun comes up. May the God who met Jacob at the river meet you in your own long night, break whatever strength is keeping you from him, and leave you leaning, renamed, and blessed. God bless you.